And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. It's Tuesday evening, so we are very much in the early part of the week. Welcome all of you down to the program. It's the place to be at 7 o'clock Guyana time every evening, Monday through Friday. And tonight we're going to have Dr. Henry Jeffrey, the Future Notes man. Future Notes. I wonder why he gave his column that name. I'll ask him. Future Notes. Future Notes. Future Notes. These academics, sometimes they have a way of using these words and terms. Good evening. Good evening to my sister, Danette Booker, who's joining us from Pennsylvania via Buxton. Good evening to you, Matthew James, and all those of you who've come in very early. Patricia Graves, Andy Goodman. I think this is Denier Samuels. Welcome to Politics 101. Tonight we are going to be continuing our coverage of the issues of the day, and of course everything now surrounds that $1 trillion budget. And I was remarking to Professor Thomas earlier today that really last year they spent $1 trillion because it was 700 and something billion dollars, and then they went about 9 times to the National Assembly for more money, and by the end of the year, they were spending close to $1.5 trillion. So we should have anticipated the $1 trillion budget. There's a lot about that budget, but the very size of the budget is in itself very instructive. I am old, but I remember when the budget used to be in the millions, and then it got to billions, and I couldn't wrap my mind around that, and now it's trillions. Good evening to all of you, and welcome to Politics 101, whether you're joining us from Canada, the United Kingdom, the United States, the Caribbean. Welcome, and good evening to all of you. Keith Beresford, welcome, and good evening. These are regulars. Louis Chapman, welcome. Everett Leonard, who's always very, very early. Ian Bino, welcome to Politics 101. A special good evening to the good people of Baracara, and I know a couple of you have been joining us recently because we've been talking a lot about your community, thanks to the exploits of your son, Shamar Joseph, the latest addition to the West Indies cricket team. But really, he has become a global sensation overnight, coming from Baracara and reaching the pinnacle of world cricket. And not for a long time have we heard Guyana and Berbice and Baracara mentioned so often in the coverage of cricket. Give thanks for Shamar Joseph and the people down the Kanji River, because Baracara is only one community. There's several communities down that creek, as we called it in the old days. They say river now, but we understood the rivers to be Demerara, Berbice, Essequibo, and Corentyne, and Mahaika and Maikoni and Kanji, and them were creeks, and of course we have other rivers in the hinterland, the Cayuni River and all those other rivers. We are, after all, one of our nicknames is the land of many waters. Welcome to Politics 101. Rastaman, good evening. Good evening to you. One of my colleagues wrote me to say that our little history of the Rastafarian movement last week, Rastaman, that he had learned a few things that he wasn't aware of in relation to the history of the Rastafari movement. And so it's always good sometimes to have these little discussions, because things we take for granted that people know, they don't normally know. I mean, the Rastafarian movement is one of our gifts to the world, the 20th century, the 20th century. Well, more than the latter part, because the movement started in 1930 in Jamaica with the coronation of His Majesty Haile Selassie, whose other name was Rastafari. Good evening, Orin Newton, watching us from Buxton. As usual, Buxtonians are always in the thick of things. Audrey Brown, welcome to Politics 101. Good evening to all the Rastafarians or Rastafarians, we give a turn. Good evening to all the brothers who have led the way in terms of cultural resistance, taking their cue from Honorable Marcus Garvey, who is regarded as the primary prophet, the first prophet of the Rastafarian movement, because, as we said last week, it was Garvey's prophecy that led to the birth of the movement. Garvey having prophesied in a play that he wrote, and he acted in the play too. And in the play, the major character predicted that an African king will rise in the East. And so when Selassie was coronated, this group of people in Jamaica saw it as Garvey's prophecy. And you may ask, well, why Selassie? Why not any other place? Well, you see, Ethiopia in 1930, up to that time, was the only African country, or the country on the African continent, that was not colonized. Later on that very decade, Italy would invade Ethiopia, and a lot of the Black world would organize and rally around Ethiopia, and saw the removal of the Italians. And so when the emperor was coronated in Ethiopia, it was a big deal, Abyssinian as they called it. And I remember growing up in the village and, going to wakes, and I remember the older men and women would sing, Ethiopia, the land of our birth, the land where our ancestors were born. And I remember that song very well. Ethiopia was a big thing, and, Mr. Roseman, we used to say, hold the banner of Ethiopia aloft, hold the banner of Abyssinian aloft. And, you pick up those things and you understand the significance until, of course, you start to read books and you realize, yeah, Ethiopia was not conquered. I remember Mr. Roseman, Gangaram. He was one of the chaps in the village that taught us how to sing at wake, because, wake singing is an art, and think. Good evening to my brother Brian Moses, Buxton, Toronto. Well, not Toronto, outside of Toronto. Years ago, when I went to Canada, one of my early visits, and hanging out with Pudding, who's another character from Buxton. And well, them boys said, we gotta go by Brian. Pudding said, really, Brian? Brian lived far, He said, Brian lived till Albion. Brian lived in the suburbs. And Pudding said, with the box there, Brian lived till Albion. You got to You got a crossbow, be sure to forget where Brian live. Oh boy, the folk, the folk, the folk, the folk, the folk, the folk, the folk. And as I said, one of the things somebody was telling me about people like the Prime Minister of Antigua, comparing him to the Burnhams and the Barrows and the Eric Williams and so on. And I had to remark that I don't think so. You know, when you listen to Eric Williams and Burnham and them chaps, you know, they had the language of the folk dung pat, and they also had the language of the Anglos dung, and they had the cadence of the biblical heroes that Black people look up to. And when you put that together, I mean, they were remarkable in terms of political communication. You know, Eric Williams, you know, when the Calypsonians get on his case, he said, let the jackass bray. Let the jackass bray. You know, I say that Solomon shall be minister of external affairs. And who don't like it, get the hell out of here. You know, them chaps or something else. The old timers say, you know, Burnham was in New Amsterdam and he waxing lyric and a man passed by a bicycle and Heckley, and he in mid-sentence said, and as fools like that will never understand. Yeah. These chaps nowadays just cuss down and raise up their dress and the petticoat and carry on. They don't know the art of political communication, not like the old timers. Welcome to Politics 101, and we're ready to roll. Let's bring in one of the persons who rub shoulders with them old timers, you know, Dr. Reed and them fellas, you know, and when, you know, Sidney King in 1953 said, you know, I will not stand for this confounded nonsense. He talking to a white man, the governor. Them time that's cuss, you're cussing the governor there. You know, of course, Guyanese put the folk thing on it and say, this confounded nonsense must stop. But Guyana said, I will not stand for this confounded nonsense. Another time, you don't talk to white people like that. So here was this black man from a village, dark, and talking to the white man. I will not stand for this confounded nonsense. It blew the mind of Guyanese. And they turned it into this confounded nonsense will stop. And when you said this confounded nonsense must stop, it's cause you're cussing. It's cuss word. And to this day, those words are part of our folk expression. But Henry Jeffrey rubbed shoulder with all them chaps, you know, he was there. Jeffrey, how you doing?
I'm there. Hanging in there.
Those old timers in terms of political expression and political communication, you know, they didn't have the match at all.
Yeah, well, you see, you're looking at from maybe our standpoint today. In those days, they had to be proper, and you had to use proper language. And you know, remember, you were just coming out of the British system and all of that, and you had to be almost like the British, but only with your own folk business. You know, remember Brindley Band? What did Brindley Band say? It's easier to stop tomorrow than to stop communism.
Easier to stop tomorrow than to stop communism, yes.
You know, I mean, they used to go about do these things. But yeah, I mean, times have changed. You now have social media. You do what you like almost on social media. The whole system has changed tremendously. You in those days you took pride in not wanting to be wrong, so to speak. You try always to be, you know, say the right things, do the right things, and all that kind of a thing. Today you say any old thing. Anybody believe, who want believe, who don't want to believe, don't believe. No, People hardly care to do research. People don't even care to read the newspaper no more. Most of the people getting their information from social media. Much of it is what George Brown said is is just people writing and talking without any referee. There's no referee in this thing, So they say you must have fact checkers and all of it, then all that's costly business. So yeah, the times have changed very much so.
Yeah. But Barnum was regarded and still is regarded as one of the great orators of his time and perhaps of all time. And what is it that was so special about Barnum? I mean, that he was put in the league of the Churchills and the great white people orators and so on.
Because, by the way, you remember what Winston Churchill says? My most spontaneous speeches were well rehearsed. Barnum was a man used to rehearse, What? Barnum had a tape recorder behind his at his back, and he'll read the thing, and it will tape, and he'd go back and say, And it Barnum told me that quote about Churchill.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Barnum tell me that quote about Churchill. Guy is sitting there and he's going back. That don't sound right. That don't sound right. I looked it up. If you really want to make a good speech and so on, you gotta do that thing about 6 times. They say.
Yes.
So effectively, these chaps work hard at doing what they were doing. They didn't just come out, as Churchill said, don't hear my little spontaneous remarks and think they come from, they were well rehearsed and waiting for the occasion to let loose.
Yes. And, in effect, what they were doing was trying to bring down colonialism by using the language of the colonialists, the institutions. So they had to master it.
Yes, because other than that, something else will start saying you're uncivilized and all of that. So, you have to show, you had at that time particular to show that I'm as good as you, even better, and so on, So, yeah, it was that different.
Yes. C.L.R. James, for example, who cherished European literature and European civilization.
Yeah.
He described himself as a colonial product who was trying to undermine colonialism, but sometimes he's criticized for that,
Beyond the Boundary was a wonderful piece, a small book, but quite nice to read.
Yeah, exactly. It is still regarded as the greatest cricket book, but it was more a book of sociology. And it was about cricket and race relations. Good evening to all of you, and welcome to Politics 101 on a Tuesday evening. Dr. Henry Jeffrey here. His latest piece in the Village Voice and reproduced today in the Kaito News. Constitutional reform. Don't drop the ball again. Don't drop the ball again. And it's part of his column, Future Notes, which appears in the Village Voice, the online newspaper, every weekend, every Sunday. And Jeffrey, why you gave your column that name, Future Notes? It used to be in the Established News Force.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to find a more or less picturesque kind of a way to put over what all of us do. What I think we do, we try to deal, commentators, I mean, if you're serious, what you try to do is to say what the present situation requires and what it would look like in the future if it is done, and what it will and should look like in the future. And therefore, given the conditions here, given the notes at the time, so effectively, that's why I said it's future notes. You're using the notes of present time to project the future and what it should look like. Well, constitutional reform, for example.
Yeah. You started the column with this paragraph, which I think, and I'm going to read it. It's up there on the screen, I think, but I'm going to read it. Having promised all and sundry, to support constitutional reforms to establish inclusive governance, the PPP spent months trying to negate the main factor that gave rise to this demand by orchestrating an undemocratic local government process to demonstrate that it was the ethnically broad-based political party and that there was no need for the kind of fundamental constitutional changes that inclusiveness will require under existing conditions. As if his government is incapable of chewing gum and walking, the president apologized for the delay by blaming the recent escalation of the border quarrel between Venezuela and Guyana. There is an observation I want to make before I ask you to expand on that first paragraph. I remember in 1992, when the PPP first came back to office, and I think it was you in one of your recent columns you were wondering how the PPP actually got into power in 1992, because they did not have a majority of the seats. And it was the WPA in Region 8 that actually gave the PPP the seat so that they could have a majority in the National Assembly. Now, there was an understanding that the PPP would have set up a PPP-WPA government after the elections, even though they didn't go in as PCD. And one of the explanations that Dr. Jagan gave was that there was no need for a PCD kind of government anymore, because the civic, and I think you were part of the civic, or supposed to be part of the civic was then the inclusiveness that he had talked about before the election. He was big on the Mandela formula. And so he felt that he had gotten the civic, he has gotten Sam Hines and others. There's no need for the WP and the PNC and so on, that was as inclusive as you can get. So when I read that first paragraph and your observation of the PPP trying to raid PNC votes in order to say that it is multiracial and broad-based, so as not to have constitutional reform, I was more than tickled. But tell us, what was your thinking as you penned that first paragraph?
But all right, let's deal with the facts here a little bit. But 1992 was not proportional representation.
Yes.
Well, if you have proportional representation, I don't think that was changed much in terms of the 2000 reforms.
No.
So proportional representation would mean that if you have one vote more, you'll have enough vote to win the presidency.
Yes, you won the presidency.
You would have got the plurality already, and the government.
Yeah.
And the PPP in 1992 got 53% of the vote.
Right. Yes.
So they would have won the government anyways.
They would have won the presidency, but what happened? They were short.
They would have won the government.
Yes.
Because the rules say that you must have people in parliament in same proportion to the votes you got in the country. Remember, you nearly had that problem with Alexander, when Alexander had to point that out to the then CEO.
Right.
That your proportion of votes in the country must be representing the proportion of seats in the National Assembly. And the PPP at that time, and 53, if I'm not wrong, forget 53% of the votes. So they would have won anyway. I am not saying what you said did not happen.
Something about the permutation.
I think, I don't know. I can't remember.
I think it was that top-up story.
Yeah, and the regional seats.
Right, because, yes, it was in Region 8.
I know that something like that occurred, but I am not certain that would have made a difference to the PPP winning the government as it is.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I got you.
So
I got you.
yeah, yeah. Uh,
But put in context for us that first paragraph.
But essentially, what I began by saying that, look, man, you had enough time to do constitutional reform if you wanted to. This is, I mean, when I say choo-choo, come and walk, you understand what I'm saying? You can only do
Right,
one
right.
thing at a time. You can't run things parallelly. You can't do none. That's what you're trying to say. And you had enough time to do this constitutional reform. There's nothing, you can't just take something that just happened and make that the excuse for you not, because the Venezuelans were doing this all the time. It's only the recent they escalate the situation. So I'm saying that was there all the time. That is not an excuse for what. But what you were essentially is, that's why that thing said drop the ball. When I said, oh, I dropped the ball, is essentially the same problem. The problem that Guyana is a situation is in which over decades you have had ethnic trouble and ethnic fighting and so on. And it's a bicommunal society. It's a multi-ethnic, but bicommunal multi-ethnic, in which two large ethnic groups control more than 80% of the voting population. And it is well known that once one ethnic group get to a point where it can large enough, let me say 40%, they say, that's why I have an article somewhere called the 40% existential threat. You see what's happening in America today?
Yeah.
Nothing you can say about Donald Trump seems to be changing that 40%, and America, the polarization and their system. And their system has a whole lot of checks and balances and have a whole lot of ways to deal with majoritarianism. So we can go Rhode Islands with a couple millions and go to Texas or with millions, and they got only 2 senators each. So they had to do all of that to get that constitution as it is. So I'm saying, what brought on this whole thing about constitutional reform and the Yanks writing there saying what you remember first. The Biden administration, its first State Department report in Guyana 2020 said, you have to change, Guyana needs to change that winner takes all system and introduce the inclusive governance. The PPP wanted to show by that local government election, but that is not true anymore. They're still doing it in all sorts of ways, but it's not true anymore. We are really the multi-ethnic party. We have Black people with us and all that, and that's what they were doing. And I said the local government election was undemocratic in the sense that they were buying votes, they were using all manner of things to do just that. And it cannot be that that's the way to run any system, to try to undermine. The United Nations is quite clear on the Declaration of Minorities and so on. They said minorities have a right to their associations. And it's enough for the existing government to try to undermine and overthrow the existing government. Indeed, they're breaking international law. So effectively, that's what I'm saying. It's not only democratic interaction, it must be illegal what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Trying to buy over, leave people. I mean, you can go to them and talk to them and think, if they turn to you, they turn to you. If they don't, you can't be undermining the existing systems. You don't want fund UG because Black people, you can't control it. You can't do that. So effectively, you don't want to pay the teachers. You are undermining Black organizations. That is what you are doing, and so on. So effectively, That is what I'm trying to say. So you are trying to demonstrate by local government election, I got control of all the towns and so on. No, I am the great multi-ethnic society. I'm not I'm not racist. I'm not anything like that. The people loves me and that is what they were trying to get at then. So they don't worry, but it failed. So here we are now.
Yeah. Just to just to refresh our memory, the results of the 1992 election: the PPP had 32 seats, the PNC 31, the WPA 1, and the TUF 1. So that is the 65 that it came up to. So the PPP depended on the UF and the WPA for a majority in parliament, but of course it won the presidency fair and square, right? So that was beyond, but it had to do with the regional permutations.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Jeffrey, why the PPP doesn't want constitutional reform?
The PPP is not at this stage is not against constitutional reform. If you did have constitutional reform in the 2010, look what it brought. It brought anything? What? Nothing. I mean, because as I said in the next part, I think is a next paragraph there, that Hoy dropped the ball.
Dropped the ball, right.
Yes, because he did not understand what we were just talking about there. He didn't take it seriously. You see, when you are brought up in the British system, you know, the British system is not a written system. Britain don't have a written constitution. Much of it is just a custom and practice and all of that. But when you got ethnic fighting, people don't care about all those customs and practice because it leaves you can do anything you want. Look what the PPP is doing now. And they're not doing things illegally, so to speak. It's not illegal. They are just going and allowing the leverage that system offers. They can almost do anything. Practice and custom would say, boss, before you get a budget and all these sort of things in the British system. The British budgeting start a year before and now. Well, I point that out.
Not in Suriname.
Yeah, not only Suriname, but look at international best practice I pointed out there. The international best practice that in no time should this course that they are going to start maybe a month, today maybe, be less than 3 months. Because you got to give people an opportunity to come and talk as in Suriname. That is the international best practice. In Britain, the system starts a year before. And that's why when I pointed out to you that they have they are given good ratings in terms of their democratic outcome. But you are not. And because you got two ethnic groups struggling for power for decades, the party in power can almost do anything it wants. Indeed, let me point out, I'm saying this, I'm not saying this for the thing, but like if I'm talking only for the PPP or thing, what happened with the deputy speakership?
Yeah.
PNC came to government. That's a tradition that the opposition should have the deputy speakership. I wrote about it at that time. I said, this is not good. The people are supposed to have the deputy. You took both.
You mean the coalition?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I thought you were a part of that.
I feel guilty. Guilty by association.
You took both. I mean, it wasn't done. It wasn't done. It was the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
So when Jagdio goes out and do all these crazy things, and we say, wow, look what you're doing. The system allows it because the system is not written. It has too many, what I said, it leaves to the will of the politicians in a whole, in many of the circumstances. It's the will of the politicians, what they feel they want to do. Jack just said, well, the party manifesto is what I'm basing is on. How can anybody in a democracy base what they're going to parliament with simply the party, you are in your manifesto? That's why that's why you call Paramount City Party. That is what you call Paramount City Party. So because you got some party, an ethnic group that vote for what they want, look Netanyahu, for both what they want, you say, that's all I am interested in. Yeah, but certainly British Constitution is not that way done. Effectively, when you go to parliament, or when you're making budgets and all those sort of things, you're supposed to sit down and try to get a national consensus around what you are going to do. You can't come and say half the country vote for me, and in British case would be less than half, because remember they got forced past the post, and people can get government of 40% of the vote, as a matter of fact. So you're just a plurality. So effectively, you are supposed to bring the third reading of Parliament. Every single law supposed to have a third reading. Jagan had said that no bill with more than 6 pages should just go through in the first stage. In the second reading, you got all these reading at the same time, except in the first, of course. So that is what we are talking about. The system is as such that you have to understand the nature of Guyana, that it's essentially a bicommunal, multi-ethnic society in which two groups have been fighting for this very long time. And therefore, unless you can write down what you want in a constitution clearly, one group gonna try, once somebody in power, they want to try to take advantage on the other. That's not in power. And they're gonna use all the leverage this open kind of British system allows them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you made the observation that in the reforms of 2000, the PNC dropped the ball, largely because of what? Because they were some of the young Turks, Aubrey Norton, Vincent Alexander, and so forth, McAllister. They were very big on power sharing, shared governance, and they had put out a document. I remember Hamley Case was also very big on power sharing, and I was part of that discourse on the WPA side, and used to be so frustrated with Hoyt because he referred to it as protean and horse trading. And I remember he used to be complaining to Hamley, who was close to him. And Hamley used to console me and saying the same thing that you said, that with a person like Hoyt, so steeped in the British tradition, you just couldn't ram the thing down his throat. By 2002, to his credit, he came around and said power sharing is an idea whose time has come. But by then, the constitutional reform was over. And there was nothing in there. And you, Jeffrey, were instrumental in trying to make good on Hoyt's promise, because you initiated a dialogue between the two parties, and you all, I understand, almost arrived. Almost arrived.
Until Janet Jagan arrives.
I know Robert says it's one of the most disappointing aspects of his political career.
Yeah. Up to now, he blames me for it.
He blames you.
I don't understand. He blames me. It's like yes, myself, Granty was John too, because Granty was the man I like.
Right.
Used to drink and things. So I used to say Granty was happening in the place and so on, and we get it going. And the thing work out. It's not Jack, break up that thing. I mean, he was president, you got to call it blame, but it's not him. I tell you 100% sure is that.
It's not Jack Deal.
No. No, but,
Yes.
but that was no, it wasn't him. Uh, but he chose to run with what was laid down, and he's doing it up to now.
Yeah, yeah.
So essentially, it's his responsibility and all of that. But essentially, yeah, that I thought that there was a way for us. And remember, there was the time when the PPP was a PNC was out of parliament and protesting, and we said, look, this can happen. And we thought we had it happening. For the last day, people sat there. We sat in that room until about 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, so I heard.
4 o'clock before Corbyn and Jack Bill would sign up. Both parties saying, he said and Corbyn saying, but if you only go to our party with this thing now, it's done. Because people gonna find so many things to criticize. Because remember, this was this was the party elites doing this, and in this kind of thing, it's party elites.
Yes.
Got to do this, a elite business here. Because anytime you take all the documentation back to anybody, if you bring to me, I can show you plenty things that can change, can this and this. And it will last forever. So they sit there till 4 o'clock in the morning, and then you got to come back for cabinet at 8 o'clock. So but that was then.
Your observation is on point, because I'm not telling tales out of school. I think we have a good audience on this program, and a lot of time my own views are in sync with most of the audience. But I realize that whenever I get to talking about power sharing and shared governance, I lose 3/4 of my audience because of the experience in recent times.
Yes.
A lot of people who would otherwise agree with our outlook when it comes to power sharing, no, Dr. Hines. I think there is a sense that, put it in raw terms, a politics of revenge,
Well,
given the way the PPP is beating up on supporters of the opposition.
But you see,
yeah, go ahead.
The other side got the same quarrel. They're gonna say you what 7,000 Indians got knocked off a morning and they couldn't do nothing. You can write where you like about Ghana. The other side got a similar story to tell. It's not a thing. I think one of the problem with what happens is that you might know John Rex. He was a South African professor, sociology.
Yes.
He was my friend.
Familiar with his work, yes.
Yeah. And he claimed that largely Black people are defensively racist. They are not superiority racist. They believe I'm better than you, that's why, anything. But if you mess with them, they are very defensively racist. And I mean, they'll fight you down, they'll do any old thing. And I think that's an expression that perhaps you are seeing there, that when they look at the PPP, look at what the PPP is doing now, and what their history as telling PPP has done in the past, that they are saying, no, but what else? You want to run the Indians? You want to think that you must take reign now and run the Indians? That is what you're saying. Just like Netanyahu is saying no. And that's why you see this thing. Guyana might not have got to the stage of Israel because it didn't start at such a bad stage, because largely Chedi Jagan was moved out of power because of containment and communism and all of that. Remember, on the other hand, is the Israelis come from all over the world and push the Palestinians out of their land in 1948 under British rulership, because British had the UN agency to look after the thing. So it's a different kind of thing. They start bad from the terrible worse than us in the first place. But it's the same thing, Netanyahu. We don't want one state solution. Well, what you want?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
What
yeah,
you want? You
yeah.
want to chase all the Palestinians out? You want to keep the ones that they're in an enslaved position? It's not going to happen.
Right, right. And the irony of that is that one of the strongest case that that the Israelis have is that they are Arab states and Arab groups who do not want to see an Israeli state. And, and to hear the Israelis themselves are saying they don't want to see a Palestinian state.
Well, you see, Hamas used to say that, but Hamas switched a bit and started talking, think of the possibilities. And I'm not certain there's which state? Iran? I don't know Iran saying they are the Hutus or whatever you call it. No, I don't. It's this dogma, and that's why when people say another thing. If we get in coalition with this group, you can win, we can win them, might collate with us like WPA or your party or whatsoever. But is a coalition got what's his name doing what he's doing? It's the right wing he decided to collate with.
Yeah.
Because they are the only ones who wanted to collate with him. And now we can't swing from them with all this killing and murdering that happening down there. It's wrong what's going on down there. No question about it. I mean, you might see a piece I wrote. I said, look, the Israelis deserve a state for themselves. Because effectively, since 1066, since Edward, William the Conqueror take England, they were killing people and doing all sort of things. When they invited the Jews to come, William, which a Frenchman, invited the Jews to come to Britain. And before you know it, long, because people get jealous of them because of how they get well quick and answer. And they start making up a whole lot of story about how they're doing Obia. When now we're thinking.
Blame them for all the bad things in the world.
I blame them for everything.
Yes.
So we got to have shared government because there is no other way. Is that or you want the PPP to run you? If for instance, if the PPP join up with a little group and they end up with the majority.
They
got a right to rule.
As a recent veteran of the power sharing thing, I felt that at one point we had gotten both populations in the major ethnic groups to at least come to some sense that we need that. But at that time, the elites weren't ready.
Yes.
And now...
Well, I think the people still... PPP invited me to talk about power sharing at Freedom House. I went, and the audience I thought the audience was quite receptive. It's elite.
It's the elites, yeah. The elites. Because I think if the PNC come out full-throttedly and said, we are for power sharing, I think the supporters will come around to it, right? I think so. And I think if the PPP were to do the same thing, but they're making calculations.
Because if they had done that, if the PNC had done that and carry out his manifesto promise, where you wrote things in this topic, if you heard Heinz, how he's explaining what this...
Yes.
when Heinz get the phone out, none of that.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, we the WPA fought to get that power sharing thing in the manifesto. We fought to get things like ethnic impact statements in the manifesto. But once we got power, you're a small party, and the big party decided, although in fairness to Granger, he did reach out when he first came in to the PPP.
Moses.
But then he nominated Moses.
He said, Moses, how can you possibly? What you should have done with Moses, and that would have been better. Let Moses actually chair the cabinet. That's what you should have done.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah,
effectively you agree with the AFC for that to happen. And that can't be anything wrong with that. I mean, it's no use to introduce constitutionality when you're dealing with people and the constitution allow you. Jagan used to allow all of us to chair cabinet.
yeah,
Anybody used to do it, rotate. Everybody
yeah,
got a
yeah,
time. Nobody
yeah.
really want to do it.
But I think the PPP used the Moses thing to get out of it, because I remember running into a big PPP man who's still big, and I don't like to call people there, running to him at cricket. So I said, man, in the presence of my friends who were with me, and he had a couple of people with him, and I said, man, why you all not into the constitutional reform? And he said, David, we had the time, and we feel that the coalition come in, and it's their chance. Let them go for, let them show what they can do. So I realized then that they weren't interested in any constitutional reform power sharing. Later on, when we saw what happened, what played out in the 2020 election, we learned that they already had a plan to regain power.
But they didn't have. You think? Well, you see, if you think that is a PPP plan, get rid of religion, that is definitely not so, in my view.
All right.
I don't believe so. The PPP didn't have that plan. But we know what's happened. Other people had it planned for great.
All right.
And the first shot is when you want to get rid of a politician. What is regime change 101? Call the opposition.
Call the opposition.
And that's what happened.
Yeah,
But it would have been a different story if he could have done all sort of thing to make the WPA, the AFC, a more viable thing. Let Moses run cabinet. Now what they gotta do with it? Moses and cabinet can do it like you're still president. Yeah, indeed, go and take a rest. You need rest. So let you do the cabinet. Yeah, but at that time, you chaps were very, hey, Moses. Oh, indeed, you were thinking about throwing out the AFC altogether. And you lot, you was irrelevant. When the election come now, you there walk around the country trying to tell people, oh, please pardon them.
Yeah, that was quite an experience. I hope that we have time to really write on that period, because there is a lot of lessons to be learned from that interlude there with the coalition, because I think we just didn't know how to do coalition politics. I think we just didn't know. I mean, we the elites, and although some of us had a different view, we all have to take responsibility for the outcomes.
Yeah. I agree with what you're saying there, but I believe that it's the same dilemma they face right now. Mm-hmm. The Americans come out. These people got a war now in this world. The struggle is between democracy and autocracy. Nowhere has this population permutation that we have in Guyana ended up good outside of power sharing. No. Mm-hmm. Now, when you start saying, I want power sharing, what are you saying? You want to be an autocrat? Because that is what it ends up as. You see what Jago is doing. He got enough power and so on to do what they want to do. The British Constitution allows him that kind of a movement, and he's doing what he feels like. Now, and nobody wants autocracy. Guyana is... Its rate is as an autocratic country. They say it's an elected democracy minus. So effectively, nobody. And the first thing they said clearly to all and sundry was this winner takes all system has to change. It is something you should press them up. Change the system and run the country that would be a liberal democratic way.
Yeah. In case you're just joining us, it's Politics 101. Dr. Jeffrey and I here are part reminiscing, part commentating, part analyzing where we are at the moment. And at the end of the day, we can have all the oil, all the money, if we don't settle the problem of who governs. And last night I spent a lot of time discussing that. Who governs? That's the question that was raised at the time of independence. It was a question that is raised now. Who governs? We have a lot of money, a lot of resources, and who governs? And we have to convince both sides that all sides have to govern in order to give us a chance to become a democracy. It's the only way out. I mean, Sir Arthur Lewis, who was not from Guyana or Trinidad or Suriname, exactly. He was from St. Lucia, but he saw the problem. He was analyzing West Africa and wrote what has now become almost like a Bible for power sharing in our part. Sidney King, going back to 1961, saw the problem, and he saw the possibility of ethnic violence, and he felt that the way to get around it was the joint premiership of Jagan and Burnham, and in order to stop the conflict. And that was before Arthur Lewis and some of the academics delving into the problem. So here we are, almost 70 years later, still grappling with that problem. Dr. Jeffrey, if we can pivot a little bit the budget. $1.14 trillion budget. From your standpoint, what's behind that budget? We know what the figures are.
We know the figures. What's behind it? PPP are distributing wealth to their own people. That is what that's there. They are doing it. Look, the government revenue, it says, went up by 200%. Government revenue. All right, we got oil, as you say, right? So we got oil, and maybe we do a lot of other things. The current expenditure went up by 109%. Not great. Mm-hmm. The capital expenditure went up by what? 900%.
Wow.
Who gonna get all these buildings to build? Who gonna get all these things? Where these people? Indians got most of the infrastructure and also this in this country. No, you gotta live with that because they're not illegal. It's right. It's because you are not at the table.
Yeah.
By the time, yes, you have to be at it 900%.
No, you're right. I mean, the business infrastructure is in the hands of Indians, and
exactly, you can't quarrel with that. That might be somewhat historical, but the PPP been in government for 30 years. They do nothing to try to change it.
That's right.
Nothing.
And so yeah.
Once you see that, you say, what were you talking about? But that's what they're doing. That's the intent. And everybody knows it.
As you pointed out, after all the debates this week and half of next week, the PPP will change nothing in that budget.
They are not required to. You have no system to make them change anything. They're not breaking no laws. It's the law you have in place, and the law Hoyt and company left in place because they didn't grasp the nature of the system you have. Those who are saying no shared government because they don't understand the system, so they're going to wait outside for all this time. And when you are in this situation, you have a greater thing to rig election, because if you're out, you're out.
Yes. Yes, the incentive to
all sort of manipulation you're going into re-elections. Because if you're out, you're out. So this is what they want to go on all the time. It cannot be. Countries that have been like us have always have. There's nowhere has the story been different. Look at Northern Ireland. Look at Malaysia. Look all over Israel. Look at what's happening now in Israel. Essentially the same position. But you are always, as you said, Guyana once says, I've joined, but Guyana also said at another level, divide the country. Because that is a solution. Look at Cyprus.
Yeah.
Cyprus is still divided because of that problem. That is one other solution. So there is no other solution. You have to be at the table to look after your interests, or else the other man gonna try to destroy your interest to stay in power.
But Jeffrey, let me tell you a story with that. Quine is a funny man. He didn't agree to put in that partition thing as a last resort.
No, all right.
But as a team player,
Okay.
he didn't argue with his colleagues. He argued that if you put that in, that will become the story. But his colleagues felt very strongly that should be put in as a last resort. And the thing is that Guyana has gotten the rap for it till up to this day.
Well, but you see, those are the look, man. It's dictatorship, divide the country, or have share government.
Yeah.
So I don't see you should be bothered about that.
Right.
Those are the choices you have. Dictatorship, much like you got now, because not Jeffrey saying so. It's the international system. This is elected democracy minus dictatorship.
Yeah. And Jeffrey, I don't know if you're aware that Jagan had called for ideological partition at one time.
I don't know what I mean.
Yes, he felt that.
Oh, you mean communists can go outside?
The socialists and communists will go one side, and
I never heard that.
Yes.
But no, Indians are not communists. You got nobody base. I don't know. You got Indian communists. It's up to them. And then around Jagan and his thing. Indians are more capitalist than thing.
Yeah, but I was making the point last night when after the second split and Rory Westmus and Carter and Guyana left, C.R. Jacobs and BRE, the capitalists came into the Communist Party. What? They weren't driven by ideology, obviously.
No. But that's what I'm saying to you. I mean, that must be when he was in one of them gaffing moods, because I can't see, and how come I never heard that?
Yes.
I know I'm not denying he said it, but
I know, because it wasn't a big deal at that time, because it was so impractical. And it's my colleague Nigel Westmus who dug that up. He's a real archives man, and he dug that up. And then of course, when he dug it up, Guyana said, well, I always knew that. But
well, now we know that Chetty wrote letters to the communists offering Guyana to be the point man to bring international communism in the region.
Yes.
Yeah, we know that now. We used to say, oh, they were wrong against Chetty and things. But if he can't be talking about democracy and want to introduce a thing with no democracy, what democracy? We proletarian democracy under Stalin. Is Stalin? He wrote that thing too.
Mm-hmm.
He sent it to the communists. Stalin was there at the time. So effectively, Jagan was under more control than you might think, because he couldn't just say no when he wrote the people and promised them that he's going to do X and Y and whatnot, and Guyana can be like the bedrock for this international communism in the region and all that thing. And once he did that, it was hard for him to go changing around. So what are we going to say? You can't go and collate with Jagan and the guard capitalists and all them. What happened now? Like, you stop being the bedrock that your father is going to be. So he couldn't do it.
Right.
But you know, David, there's a more important element of this thing that still haunts us today. That because Jagan was out of power so long, he ain't got nothing to give his people. And Jagan, essentially, the PPP hold on and this racism and anti-Burnhamism. It's racism and anti-Burnhamism kept the PPP going for them time. Because if they made the Africans, PNC, look like a danger and a threat that is so terrible, That thing, and they had to keep the group there. Hopefully, if the communists that come out had as the winner of this struggle between themselves and capitalism, they could have walked back on that. But that is what was that's what they had to do to keep all the supporters together. So effectively, we are suffering from that now. And up to now, the PPP is doing it. We see Jagyo got caught up in, remember Christopher brought a case when he said about to kick down the door, wasn't that?
Yes, right.
Now they got a whole heap of soldiers, 3,000 soldiers, and they're supposed to stop Venezuela. And they can't stop 5, 6 people coming down from Golden Grove or wherever to run through the supporters and that. And they got these chaps there to stop Venezuela. I mean, what are you telling me here? You see, and therefore, it's the nature of the system. And you got to deal with the nature of the system. And the only way you got to show me another place that it is either been dictatorship, as you are seeing now in Israel and here, and it has either been shared government, as you're seeing as Ireland, you saw it in Malaysia, and a little bit in Fiji, but that was a little Banziram, a little dictatorship that did that too, or divided country.
Dr. Jeffrey, I know you had quite a bit to do with education. You're part of academia, but you also serve as Minister of Education at one point. And one of the hot debates around, around the budget is the small amount of money that is put aside for UG. And one would have thought that even in a contentious environment like ours, that your university, at a time when we have so much resources, we are a true state, research and development are very important, that you would want to beef up your only tertiary system. Talk to me. Talk. What?
PPP, I said that's in 2015. PPP want to control all these things they can't control. They got to do it. Yeah, we give 20,000 scholarships. But you remember who giving it? They set up some little and they're giving it to who they want. The PPP wants to be in that kind of position. But that the PPP has been underfunding the university goes without saying. I was given the Dr. Irvin lecture in 2004, and I gave some numbers. In 2004, as I pointed out before, the GDP, gross domestic product, was $840, right? And spending per child in tertiary education, university included, but mostly to university, was 1,000 US per person. 2004. That was over the GDP. You understand? GDP was 840 US. Over the GDP, they were spending on things, and I end up by saying, hey, that is credible. Jamaica was spending, Barbados, Jamaica and Trinidad was spending 64%, 71%, and 70% of their GDP on education, on tertiary education. Guyana was spending 106% on tertiary 2004. What are we spending now on education? 1,000. But this is a rough thing because I took it out of Priya and McDonald and them putting down. I ain't go back to look at nothing. But because you say I'm interested, I got nasty feeling you would have raised these kinds of things, you see, and I said, let me just but truly, I don't. And they're spending about $1,700 US.
Yeah.
It's 10% of the well, less than 10, but I'm saying don't GDP. Run with GNI or whatsoever.
Mm.
Gross national income that actually come to you because GDP too much. And so effectively, and they only it's about 14,000, well, more than that, but let me say about 14,000 US. Guess what you were you spending at UG? 1,700.
Yeah.
10%.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
About
$4 billion, $4 billion.
so don't tell
Yeah.
me that.
Yeah.
I mean, we see where this going. We know that that is their intent. They're underfunding UG. The first thing if you want a decent university, you gotta get decent staff. You gotta do all sort of things. Man, let's. I'm not even thing there. And I said it. I wrote it in that same lecture I was given at the time, and I might even do something with it this weekend. So effectively, there is where we are.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so that is what I think. The PVP is going ahead. They're distributing wealth to their supporters. That goes into. They're not paying the teachers, and they're not giving any pensioners anything, and they're not, and they don't want any holistic plan that will include everybody in a structured way, because then they would be unable to avoid giving you. So they want any structure. You walk around some village. So while they're taking away resources from the teachers and so on, that's in the village, they are going to walk around with their little groups and give them little money. The same money they took from the
They
teachers.
took away from them. Yeah.
They're taking these little groups all around the place.
Mm-hmm.
So don't tell me. I don't pay much attention to budget outside of the basic things that happen. So
Right. 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 Dr. Henry Jeffrey here tonight. We had a long discussion on constitutional reform. His column can be read in the Village Voice every Sunday and sometimes reproduced in the letter section of either the Kaitro News or the Stabrook News or both sometimes. Always very good reading, very good reading. And of course, he comes here every other week for us to discuss his columns and issues arising. As you notice, we didn't spend a lot on the budget because, of course, we are coming at the budget from a political standpoint. What is it that are behind the numbers? Because the numbers can sometimes lie in the sense that the numbers give us a sense. Jeffrey, I've been saying over and over, I was a small boy. And in those days as small boys, you were into radio. And I remember Wilfred David was then an advisor to the PNC. And he was on radio doing something. I was a little boy, 12, 13 in high school. And I heard him say that you can have growth without development. And in my little mind, that didn't make sense. Because to me, once you have growth, development was automatic. No, I'm 12, 13, right? So, but I said, well, this man, Wilfred, who I came to know well later on, is a bright man. So he must be saying something that I could not understand. All right. Here we are almost 50 years later, and we are grappling with the same concepts of growth and development, because the PPP is saying, look, this growth, first of all, they said the growth got to do with them, and the growth had to do with oil. It had nothing to do with government and political party, right? But then they're conflating the growth of the GDP with development. And what is the danger of that?
They are going to blindside you with the growth. You see, because most people believe this. For instance, Singapore is a well-developed country. You notice they're talking a lot about Singapore being like Singapore. That Singapore is one of the most developed economies in the world. But guess what? Singapore is below Guyana in democratic participation.
There you go.
Guyana is a elected democracy minus. Singapore is an elected autocracy. They got the Chinese there, and the Chinese voted for the Chinese for the last 70 years.
Yeah.
So effectively, development ain't got growth ain't got nothing to do with particular freedom and political freedoms and your freedom. It's all sort of other thing. I mean, you can be totally unfree in a economic development situation. China, Soviet Union at
Yeah,
one time. So I mean, yes, I mean,
yeah,
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 but
yeah,
they
yeah.
won't blindside you with the growth.
Hmm.
Oh, look, we are spending a lot of money, but you go on, your freedoms are all disappearing, and but it's never gonna disappear because of the nature of this society. It's like the Israeli, thing. It never, because people here fought from slavery for their freedom, and nobody are taken away for no growth because we can have both.
That's right. And Dr. Jeffrey, what a note to end on, because I think that is very instructive. I think there are some people in the elite and probably some of our brothers and sisters in diaspora who are beginning to feel that this thing is sustainable. The PPP will continue in this forever, and black people taking blows and then thing, right? And I have made that same point you're making. No people who endured and eventually overcame slavery and colonialism gonna take this kind of thing
Yeah, treatment for
uh,
no growth.
for growth and a little small piece. What a note to end on. Thank you very much, my brother. And
Yeah,
I'll see you. I'll see you in 2 weeks. And Dr. Henry Jeffrey's column every Sunday in the Village Voice. I want to thank you all. Growth and development we ended on, and I'm going to have Professor Clive Thomas here tomorrow night to deal with this whole question of growth and development. And I think on Thursday we are having Vincent Alexander and Eric Phillips. We have had Eric on for a long time, and we're going to be talking about development and growth from an ethnic perspective. From an ethnic perspective. So I want to thank you all, as usual, for staying with us and holding the struggle, because the struggle goes on. The struggle goes on. And where we ended tonight, because I've had a little myth with some of our supporters. You know, when I made the point in Kedaki's program last week or the week before, that black people may be beaten up, the PPP beating up on black people. But I don't think that black people taking blows, because to say you're taking blows is to say you're being knocked out. I think black people are being knocked down sometimes, but not knocked out. No people who underwent that slavery and beat it, is going to allow themselves to be buried by this regime in power. It's not going to happen. It doesn't mean that we don't have to fight more. Yes, we have to fight more. I'm not saying that we shouldn't fight more. We should just sit down and things are going to happen. No, you got to fight. And I agree that we probably are not fighting up as much as we should. But I am saying my study of history, my study of the sociology and the culture of African people says to me that in the not too distant future, this is all going to unravel. Maybe in ways that we may not like, and that is what people like myself and others are trying to massage. Because we have had our dooms. We have had the 1960s. We don't want that again. We have had the problem with the escapees from prison and what happened from Buxton 20 years ago. We don't want that again. And so there are people like us who are trying to massage the thing and trying to keep the thing together. But when the PPP is behaving the way they're behaving, every time I hear the crack of a whip, my blood runs cold. When they are cracking that whip, I tell you, when black people hear the crack of the whip, their blood run cold. And when the road run cold, it's a different story. And the blood of black people the blood is running cold. Because they're hearing the crack of the whip every day. Every day. Every day. It is not sustainable. The outcome may not be what we like, and God forbid. We don't want to walk those roads again. We don't want to. But one thing I know is that this is not sustainable. Let not your heart be troubled. Neither, you all know the Bible better than me. Let not your heart be troubled. Neither, and you all know how to finish it.